Good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here, and I recognize some names and faces around this virtual table this morning, but not everyone. So just a little bit about me. So Claire Noonan, the new-ish Vice President for Mission Integration here at Loyola. I arrived July 1st, so I feel like I'm just not new anymore, but still learning really about the community. And I have the joy also of, I worked here in campus ministry in the early aughts, and so it's neat to come back to a place that I knew so well at one time, but has changed so much in those intervening years, and so kind of get to know it all over again. So I'll just say a word about how I'm kind of going to organize our time, and then jump in here. As the description of this morning's seminar said, I took my title from the opening words of the university's mission statement. And actually the opening word is we are, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'd like to give us a time at the beginning here to get to know the we that's assembled here this morning. And then I'm gonna give just a few words about some influential thinkers that have shaped the way I think about these adjectives that we use to describe the kind of university that we are at Loyola. And then I'm going to invite all of us to engage in a conversation about, those ideas, those characteristics, where the resonances are for you, where you sort of stumble or get stuck, what is most energizing for you at this point in the university's history and your engagement with it, and then we'll close and be on our way. Part of what I'm going to talk about is context and how context shapes mission, and so I'm curious how the context of your life has shaped how you are showing up here this morning, and also just for myself, I'm quite aware that it's been a very culturally very difficult few days for many of us, between the shootings at Michigan State, the release of the video of the death of Tyree Nichols, the earthquake in Turkey, Syria. I mean, it's a heavy time, and I recognize that people might be bringing those realities into our conversation this morning. So I'm Claire Noonan, and my work, as I said, is Vice President for Mission Integration here at Loyola, which really means I'm kind of responsible for stewarding and nurturing the institution's Jesuit Catholic identity. And I am coming to this conversation in a spirit of humility. As I was looking at the names of people who had registered to be with us, thinking, I am certain that any number of you could be giving this seminar, could be leading this seminar. And so I'm eager to learn more about what's in your hearts and minds. So I'm going to just share this screen, which is a very simple slides just to keep me on track, and just so people don't feel like they have to take notes or listen to the details as I kind of run through some of these ideas. And thank you, Megan, for kind of setting us up for the a reminder about what our mission statement is and when it was developed. 2009. I actually am just was yesterday on a call for the group that is going to be writing the new assurance argument for our HLC accreditation process, and was reading over again the history of how this mission statement was developed. And as Megan said, I agree with her that it is a statement that has some enduring value because it is so expansive. And let me say that I consider mission to be sort of synonymous with purpose, right? So this is the long-term purpose that we have claimed for ourselves, that we have named for ourselves as a university community. And it endures beyond a strategic plan. I think this mission statement has been through at least 3, maybe 4 or 5 strategic plans since its inception. It endures for, I don't think we have any business faculty in the room, but a mission endures beyond a vision, right? Which is a horizon, which is a destiny, a destination. But a mission, again, I see as the community's claimed purpose for itself. Before we get into Chicago's Jesuit Catholic, I just want to say a word about university. So this story might be apocryphal, but I think it's true. It seems true. And coming from a culture and a religious tradition that values myth in the strongest and best sense of that word, I think it's a good story, even if it's not, even if it didn't happen historically. But there's a story about Father Ted Hesburgh, who is the famed longtime president of the University of Notre Dame. I know Megan's a Notre Dame grad. Are there other domers around in the group here that might know? So anyway, Father Ted was asked a question about what it meant to be a Catholic university. And his response was that the first thing to remember is that the institution is, first of all, a university. That in that description of the institution, university is the noun and Catholic is the adjective. Catholic is the way the Notre Dame is a university, the kind of university that Notre Dame is. But it is, first of all, a university, which means that our essential mission and function is about the creation of knowledge and the education of not only our students, but the whole society, right? Which you see here reflected in our own mission statement, working to expand knowledge, and even in that verb of seeking, right? And it means also that as we start to unpack those other adjectives, those other descriptors, we have some guidelines or some bumpers down that bowling toward the strike zone kind of exploration of who we are and what our mission might mean. We're not a business, as much as people like to talk about the model, business model of a university these days. We are not, in fact, a business. We're a university. Even though we say we are in service to humanity, we are not a social service organization. We are not the government. We are not a parish. We will talk about being Catholic and Jesuit, but we're not a parish. We're not an archdiocese. We're not synonymous with the Society of Jesus. We're not a religious order. And we're not a high school, either. We're not a pre-K or secondary education. We're a university. So then from kind of that starting place, we have described ourselves with these other 3 words: Chicago's Jesuit Catholic University, the kind of university that we have said we are and that we are striving to be. So I think my experience over the past 6 or 7 months at Loyola has been that there is among our community sort of a kind of widespread understanding of Catholic as a religious tradition and also as a sort of sociological or political or kind of economic player in historical actor, if I could just say, maybe put it that way. But what I'm wondering if we might be a little bit underdeveloped here that I'd like to take some time for us to consider around the table and ask for what your experience has been with this, or what your own sense of ownership and responsibility for this kind of vision of who we are, this mission of who we are. To consider that adjective Catholic as a descriptor of our intellectual life. And I'm going to take these characteristics or features from an article by Monica Helwig called "The Catholic Intellectual Tradition in a Catholic University," which in my field of study and administration this article has become kind of a classic. So you may have run across it before. I hope you have. I'm going to be a little bit sad if this is the first time anybody is hearing of this article. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with Monica, she's deceased now, but she was a professor of theology for many years at our I don't know, do we say sister or brother Jesuit institution, Georgetown, for many years. And she also was the president of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, which is the national network of the 250 or so Catholic colleges and universities around the country. So Monica in this article says that being a Catholic university means that we are stepping into the stream of a tradition of an intellectual life that is a body of content, right? A body of knowledge that has produced, great works of philosophy and theology and art and literature and science and other sociology, politics, economics. So it's a body of work, of creation of knowledge, but it is also the Catholic intellectual life is also a way of proceeding, an approach to knowledge, to the expansion of knowledge, and also to the transformative education of the young. And she calls out or distilled that tradition of approach to knowledge, which she calls the Catholic intellectual tradition, into these 6 characteristics. First, that in the Catholic intellectual life, there is a continuity between faith and reason. Both the assertion or the claim that we can come to know, we can come to the truth, both through faith and through the exercise of reason, but also that there is a unity of truth, meaning that the conclusions that we will come to in our exploration of the truth of the world through our faith and through our disciplines, our exercise of reason in our disciplines, are ultimately one, or they will not be in contradiction with each other. Second, she says that in a Catholic intellectual life, there is a respect for the cumulative wisdom of the past. And essentially here, one of the things she's doing is contrasting Catholic intellectual life with a different sort of way of knowing that might be more firmly rooted. David, you can tell us if this is true or not, in the Calvinist tradition, which really goes back to the scriptures as this primary source of truth, and doesn't weigh as heavily in its thinking the accumulation of knowledge that happens over time, tradition itself. It also, what she's also saying here is that in the Catholic intellectual life, we are open to and looking for sources of truth that that are not only from our own, religious faith tradition, but also, and she'll raise up, for example, St. Thomas Aquinas's work, who consulted both the Greek philosophers and the Muslim great wisdom figures in his thought, right? Third, she speaks about an anti-elitist bent to the Catholic intellectual life. And what she means by that is two things. One, first of all, that the pursuit of knowledge is for the good of humanity, not to store up goods in some elite, whether that be an intellectual elite or a economic or political elite, but that the pursuit of knowledge, the intellectual life, is for this, in the service, as we put it in our mission statement, is for the service of everyone. She also is talking here about accessibility of education and the intellectual life, and that the use of our minds, the education of people is should be accessible and available to everyone. But this is part of the full flourishing of the human person, is the development of our minds. Fourth, attention to the community dimension of all human behavior. And here I think what she's really, if I can say, she's sort of contrasting this to what might be a typical way of thinking about the human being that sometimes dominates, well, if I can say, a white American, US American, right? Not the Americas, but a US Enlightenment notion of the individual as the dominant characteristic or feature of the human person. But in the Catholic intellectual life, we're always seeing the individual in community, that every dimension of our behavior has a community effect and a community source. Fifth, the concern for the integration of goals and objectives, that we are in a Catholic intellectual life. We are not divorced from the effects of the knowledge that we produce, and we are looking always at the way we pursue things would be in harmony with what our goals are at the end of the production of that knowledge. And then lastly, a keen awareness of the sacramental principle, which firstly she means that we have an awareness that everything that we are pursuing in the intellectual life has a sacred dimension, because all of creation has its origin, but also its destiny in the divine. And secondly, what she speaks about in her description of the sacramental principle is a priority on memory and imagination, that the interpretation of our present experience is always drawing on our memory and is both shaping our imagination and has imaginative possibilities for how we will shape the future. Okay, that's a lot, but just a few ideas from Monica Hellwig about the second thing I kind of set of ideas I want to take a moment to look at around that word Catholic and what it means for our mission is to think of Catholic as some principles for our social relationships. And these ideas I'm drawing from an article by Dan Grudy, who is a priest of the Holy Cross and professor of theology at Notre Dame, who wrote an article called A God of Life, a Civilization of Love, where he extracted these themes of what some people will call Catholic social teaching or Catholic social thought, but it is the principles for what we're aiming for, a sort of set of value statements, if you will, about how we want to organize ourselves as a society. So just to run through these quickly. Analysis of social reality, that a first stage in any sort of moral thinking or way that we would organize ourselves as a community, it has to begin with an analysis of the social reality. Second, the gratuity of God. It's taken as a given in Catholic social thought that all of creation is a gift of a loving creator and is to be received and treated as such by the community. An ordering of the society toward the common good, that the measure of any society is not only about how the best or the most successful among us do, but that every member of the society should have access to the goods of the society and of the earth, really. That the dignity of the human person, of each individual person, is a God-given right and characteristic. The option for the poor references a principle essentially that boils down to the way we judge any society is how those who are most vulnerable within it will fare. And that our orientation should be toward the protection and the uplifting of those who are the most vulnerable. Freedom as rights and responsibilities, just meaning that we are free human beings with certain rights, as you would find, for example, in a US context in the Constitution. Catholic social teaching claims additional economic rights for human beings, which you would find sort of more akin to what's in the UN charters. But also that means we have a responsibility. Our exercise of freedom has to be toward the common good and toward using our gifts and talents and assets for the benefit of the community. Life as a sacred gift. Again, this is sort of a cradle to grave, seamless garment idea of the protection of human life, again, with its inherent dignity. Involvement of all people in the creation of a social order. So sometimes we use the term social justice to mean many different things, but in Catholic social thought, social justice, this is really what the reference is to. It's to people's free participation in the creation of the social order. That's what we're after. The kind of the meaning of social justice that we sometimes hear in our kind of common language, really in Catholic thought, we call that distributive justice, that the goods of the society should be distributed equitably among the members of the society. Social justice in Catholic social thought really refers to participation in the creation of the social order. Family of blood and humankind. So kind of two points here. One is that in Catholic social thought, the family is the first building block of a society. And secondly, by virtue of all of us being children of God, we share a family that is embracing of all humankind. And then finally, and this is an area that is really, I would say, nascent, right? It's just at the beginning of its development. We're, I think, 8 years from Laudato Si, Pope Francis's first famous encyclical, Laudato Si. Not that he invented this idea. This idea goes back to Genesis, but the notion of integral ecology and care for the earth is kind of a fundamental principle of Catholic social thought. Okay, so a few things to think about what Catholic might mean as a descriptor of a Catholic university. How does our identity as a Catholic institution, with reference to our intellectual life and principles for how we will organize not only ourselves as a university, but how we as a university seek to influence the society, what does that hold for us? What does that mean for us now at Loyola? Okay, Jesuit. So there's a lot of things we could say. Jesuits are 500 years since I think you all celebrated last year St. Ignatius's conversion. You talked a lot about cannonball moments. So this is 500 years of tradition that and 250 actually about Catholic universities, Jesuit universities or institutions of higher education around the world. So there's lots of ways to think about what that might mean for us at Loyola at this point in history. But for today, I thought I might just draw on these 4 apostolic preferences. So one thing for sure that descriptor Jesuit means of our institution is that we are an intellectual apostolate of the Society of Jesus. We are sponsored by this religious community, and periodically they do their own discernment about what their call, their priority, their preferences are for their apostolic work. And the last iteration of what those preferences, the most recent iteration of those preferences, took place in 2019. And these are the 4 preferences that the Society of Jesus identified for their work and therefore for ours. The first, to show the way to God through the spiritual exercises and discernment. In my short time at Loyola, it does seem that people have some familiarity with that language around Ignatius's exercises and do know that this gift of a method for discernment, for making decisions, for reading a situation to discern where we're being called, is a gift that is ours in the tradition, the Jesuit tradition, and one that we are developing. We are trying to be ever deeper and give more and more people access to the experience. Secondly, to walk with the poor, the outcasts of the world, those whose dignity has been violated, in a mission of reconciliation and justice. I think that's sort of self-explanatory, but for us, I think the question is, what and who are we being called to walk with at this point in our history? Third, to accompany young people in the creation of a hope-filled future. For me, I think I'm really drawn here to those words, the accompany and creation in this preference. And I would wonder what draws you, what animates you. And finally, to collaborate with gospel depth for the protection and renewal of God's creation. Again, I think that's sort of obvious what they're talking about there. And that, again, does seem to be something that Loyola has been and continues to take seriously. And Jennifer, it was nice to hear you bring that into the conversation already, even in your introduction of yourself. Okay, and finally, Chicago. What does it mean that we are here? That we are in this time, in this place, in this city that is both a city of neighborhoods, right, with our own very localized, particular histories, economies, politics. We're right in the middle of this mayoral election, right? Politics. What are the joys and the sorrows, the hopes and the griefs of this particular community in this region? And also, I think, and this is something that I'm curious to see. I think our new President Reed has is particularly attuned to. What opportunities, calls, potential do we have? Does our mission have? Residing in a city that also has global aspirations and connections and relationships and influence. So sort of these two elements of what being of and in Chicago is. This set of very local concerns, and also some aspirations and potential impact that is global in reach. Being at Curl, I'm very curious what the group around this table, who has this urban core to it, will think about that. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and I'd like to just open up for some conversation now. There are a few of us that I think we can just, speak freely. And if you're having trouble, if you have something to say and you have trouble jumping in, if you use the hand raise, David or I will be able to get you in there. So I'm happy for any reactions people want to share, or any questions people have. But what I'm curious about is how do these descriptors, Chicago's Jesuit Catholic, resonate with you? What do they mean for you in your work or in your kind of corner of this university? Where do you feel energized and excited? Where do you trip or object or find hesitancy in yourself? And maybe lastly, what contribution do you think you're making? Or you and the smaller community of which you're a part, think you're making toward this larger purpose that we've claimed for ourselves in this mission. So I probably shouldn't have given 4 questions at once, but so people came, I think, with something to say. So let me just stop talking now and let you say it. See what kind of conversation emerges. And those of you who are already in education, or already so immersed in the city, I'd love to hear what you have to say about your work and Loyola's identity and mission in that regard. Everyone is stunned into silence. I'm not sure how to read that. People are here, or if they're
I'll even
thinking,
turn my video on.
oh, Annette, great.
I'll start. Since no one's starting, I'll leap in, and I also won't be able to stay for really long, so I'll make sure that I get in. I had two thoughts related to that, and I am one who's on the more urban Chicago side, and what are we doing in that area? And one of the things that I find frustrating with that kind of effort, with both my students and what we are teaching and their ability to get involved and our ability to get involved in working with communities, is that it always seems more isolated at Loyola than it really should be. I know there are people in the School of Education who work on these types of things, and in social work and in Curl and in my program, but there doesn't seem to be a very good synergy or integration or thoughts about how we can bring people together more. And as a part of our last strategic plan, that was one of the things that kind of came up, of lots of people thinking about, we have a bunch of components in areas outside of this sort of focus on the urban as well, but within the urban focus, and we don't seem to have a good structure at the university to help us kind of pull together and work together and build off of what everybody else is doing, which in particular could be very useful for our students who, again, see us in different classes and different programs, but how are they able to help put it all together? So that's kind of my first thought in terms of where Loyola is and where Loyola might be going, or where I'd like to see it go. Because I know what I do, I know what various people that I talk to are doing, and there's some efforts, but it would be better. It just feels like there are missed opportunities for Loyola, given our location in Chicago, and given that kind of social justice interest in communities and our students' interest in those things. The second point that I'll make was something that I wasn't expecting until I heard your last part about Chicago as a global city and Chicago as a city of neighborhoods. And, yes, those are great ways to think about Chicago, and they are actually probably in tension. That is what most people who study cities will say. Global cities want to be cities of finance and commerce, maybe tourism. They are great places to be if you have a lot of money. They are not necessarily great places to be if you don't. And that's not a part of what being a global city is all about. Being a global city is aspiring to be New York and London and San Francisco. And recently we've started to think more within the urban field about knowing that elevation also brings greater tensions across different groups and across different classes. But we don't really know what to do about it. And so if we're going to focus on Chicago, I know the people who focus on Chicago being a global city, they miss Rom. And I know some of the people who focus on the city as a group of neighborhoods, and they don't miss Rom at all. So there's that kind of tension that if we are going to say we want to think about Chicago in both of those ways, and we want Loyola to play some role in both of them, how are we going to end up thinking about that, and what are we going to end up promoting? So those would be my thoughts. And I can throw it open to everybody else.
I love it, Annette. Thank you so much. I just on your first point about us being sort of isolated from each other, I have noticed that also, that I don't know if it's a function of being 4 campuses or 14 schools or 17,000 students. I don't know if that's the way that we have been able to make our lives manageable. But I agree. I have sensed that same both desire within the community to make clear connections, but also the difficulty of doing that, given people's sometimes need to narrow their focus. So I really thank you for raising that, and I love the analysis of even what kind of mayor do we want. Thanks. Okay. Thanks for being with us, Jessica. Anyone else want to share your reactions? What resonated with you, or where did you find yourself in this picture of what Loyola is or might be? Yeah, Bridget.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm off camera now. I'm tending to some kids at home, but this was really helpful. And as you were saying, oh, I hope this isn't the first time you've seen Monica Hellwig's article. It was the first time that I was being exposed to that. And so that makes me think some things about some work we want to be doing. And the other piece that I was thinking about was how, and Megan, you mentioned this at the beginning, but just in our role in the faculty center, I feel like we do a lot of translating. We want to be helping people understand that some of what they're doing, much of what they're doing really does align with these sort of standards of pedagogy that are steeped in the mission, steeped in Catholic intellectual thought, and people are just using different vocabulary. We are, I don't want to use the word confronted in like an aggressive way, but we're certainly confronted often with our colleagues who, for a variety of reasons, have some hesitance around embracing things that have kind of religious connotation, either that they have a different faith tradition, and so others' faiths feel sort of unfamiliar or maybe even a little bit just challenging, or maybe they're not faith oriented as an individual and don't want to think about things in that way. So the idea of translating all of these really important themes and concepts and approaches and sort of applying them to just the lived human experience that everybody is having at the university or not, is just central to what we do. So sometimes it goes really well and sometimes it doesn't, but it is really core in how we approach things, is trying to make this as accessible as possible to the whole community, regardless of where folks are coming from religiously or culturally or any other way.
Thanks, Bridget. I appreciate that. And I'd be happy to share this article with the whole group, both articles that I was drawing from with the whole group. So you can read it further and hopefully it will be helpful to you. I really appreciate that. And it's true that, the other element of the mission statement of Loyola is we call ourselves a diverse community. And that means that we are religiously diverse, as well as diverse in other ways. And so there is a translation exercise that always has to go on, and also a education exercise that has to go on as new people join our community constantly. And I also will just say, I think for those, even those members of our communities that are Catholic, either were raised Catholic or continue to practice a Catholic faith, many of these things are quite unfamiliar to them because, well, what should I say? So a lot of inside the church, a lot of people call, for example, the treasure of Catholic social thought as the best kept secret, right? It's not, and for many Catholics, and, Timon, maybe you can attest to this, because I know, religious education is one of your specializations, but for many people, their education in the faith stops at best at 8th grade. And so their exposure to the church to being Catholic as having anything to do with their intellectual life is quite limited. So I appreciate that. The other thing I just want to say, and this is kind of from my work in interfaith cooperation, I shy away from using the word regardless of people's religious tradition or whatever other element of identity or diversity we're naming, because I don't want to approach that conversation without regard for people's identity or religious faith. Rather, it's with regard. Where are the points of connection? Where are the points of departure? And how do we truly value difference and not try to make everything down to the lowest common denominator? Actually, there is something distinct in this tradition, that there are many things that, and the other thing, let me just add, the provost at my previous institution, in these conversations about mission and Catholic identity, he would always say, these elements of our identity are distinct. They are not necessarily unique, right? Meaning there is much of what I've just said that is shared widely with people of other religious traditions, of no religious traditions. I'm not claiming that this is a unique way of being in the world. On the other hand, it should be a distinct way of being in the world. So I've always liked that kind of distinction from distinct versus unique. Megan.
I had a slight tangent, so if anybody else wanted to comment on Claire or Bridget, I can wait. I think it relates. So another word or concept that's been in my mind in this conversation is the idea of invitation. And I think, Claire, even coming back to you pointing out that the mission statement begins with we. There is a communal, there is a gathering of that. And you hit the big words that sometimes are not invitational to some people, that immediately from experience or ignorance or whatever else, they don't feel drawn in or part of some of those things of mission. So I think it's a huge question and responsibility is, how do we speak of it in the ways that this idea of translation, and Claire, you talking about regarding, not disregarding who is part of our community. So a little bit there. On a different angle of that sense of invitation, I also think of who are we expecting to show up so that we can live our mission without actually inviting them. In my role in community engagement, and I think many of us do that, to live our educational mission as Loyola has it right now, other folks have to be involved. We talk about educating our students to be people for others. That involves them being in the community. And are we actually presenting that in a way that is truly invitational to the many other people who help educate our students, or is it an expectation? So just a couple of things on that idea of invitation that are in my mind this morning.
Thank you very much, Megan. Yeah, Trevor.
I wanted to kind of echo something that Bridget had said, and also that you were talking about, Claire, about the identity of the institution, and the weight that it feels in engaging that kind of explicitly when it comes to its Catholic identity. Yeah, it doesn't feel like a new problem to me. Hans Kolvenbach said in 2000 that neither dogmatism nor ideology are serving us, and they're making us adversaries of each other. And I find that when I talk to students and also fellow faculty members, you either have kind of the resurgence of this kind of pietism, or you have this very, kind of secular humanist perspective. And one of the beautiful things about the Jesuits is I feel like they've always tried to kind of bridge that gap quite well. Arupe, I think, certainly has tried to do that. But I liked the distinctions you made, and I wrote it down here about distinct but not unique, and not regardless but with regard to. I think that it's great to have people critically reflect on a tradition that is or is not theirs in light of their own experience. I find that increasingly there's a lot of uncertainty around it, or a difficulty of kind of exploring that, because people are worried about offending somebody, or they want to be respectful of different faith traditions. But I always feel like it's kind of spurious kind of respect to think that I can't engage with you about something that's fundamental to who I am or to who you are. I feel like it's better for us to kind of, and you mentioned in one of the articles you wrote, Claire, this piece on brave space. And I feel like that is a really good piece of grounding for the Jesuit desire to talk about justice education, but also an education around larger questions of meaning and identity. And I feel like planting the flag in our own identity and bringing that to our spaces in education, I feel like is so important. So I like that idea of, you know, not regardless of, but with regard to, can people engage in these larger questions of faith and identity in light of their own experience with regard to where they're coming from? I think that's a really helpful clarification for me.
Yeah. Thanks, Trevor. You know, just the other piece I'll say, and this is, you know, again, from my role as an administrator and, you know, with responsibility for mission integration, there's a piece of a hesitancy around engaging or talking about the institutional identity of the place that to me is it's disingenuous and it's just false. I mean, whatever you might think of those descriptors, Jesuit, Catholic, whatever any member of this community might think of those, it is just a fact that this is a Jesuit Catholic university. That's just a fact of the matter. So it's a little, to me, it's a little disingenuous to try to ignore or back off from that. Because it's just, it's not truth in advertising, right? It's just, it is just a fact that this is a ministry of the Society of Jesus, which is an order of the Catholic Church. So let's figure out what it means. Anybody else?
You know, Claire, I'll finally unmute here, not because I'm shy, but because I could dominate this conversation as I am wont to do, and that's being a bad host. So, but I will jump in here and just sort of say this. I'm gonna, as I expected, there's so many bits and pieces that resonate or don't with my experience and sort of the Curl experience over 27 years for me. But it's interesting is that various ways, you know, there's a tension in many of the things that we're trying to be and to not just, to be, not just espouse, but to live out. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, I think there's, you know, whether you go back to Annette, she's not here in the room anymore, but you know, Annette's naming the tension between being a global city and what that might mean for elites versus being a city of neighborhoods, or you know, the tension between a Catholic quote unquote identity and those of us for whom you know, we come from different faith traditions. Ratted me out as the neighborhood Calvinist, so which is fine, I'm totally okay with that. You know, but there's a tension there, but there's also, and again, I don't mean that as a inherently as a negative thing. I think it's what leads us to ask good questions. I think it's what leads us to, you know, Megan jumped in and you saw maybe that I did the old raising of the thumb there to some of those things. Like we need, and certainly Curl in its research, you know, being collaborative and community-based, participatory research. We're nothing without our partners, and that's you know, we don't exist without our community partners. But there's a tension there. That's not something that comes naturally to academics, historically speaking. I don't think it comes naturally to this institution to invite in community partners as true partners. And so again, that just, I'm kind of, what's bubbling up for me is the tension, a creative tension, sometimes a frustrating tension. And the final thing I'm going to say is things I'm going to say, at Curl, we have always said, when I go out to talk to other places, other universities, or talk with my colleagues from other universities, there is a distinct privilege of being Curl at Loyola University Chicago. That Jesuit Catholic, Chicago-based identity allows us a freedom to justify what we do at Curl and how we do what we do at Curl. That maybe my colleagues at some of the land grant institutions, I think of UIC most locally, kind of have, or our colleagues at DePaul, like to your point that it's not necessarily unique, but it's distinctive. And that distinctive character of the mission allows us to make a case for why we do what we do and how we do what we do. I'll be the first to say that over the years, I've referred to it as both a carrot and a stick with regard to getting things moving forward within the university. That it's the carrot of this is what we're going for. Let's chase after it. And I'm merely a staff member here who could be dismissed at any time. So I'm cognizant of that. But I also have no problem over the years of using the Jesuit mission, the university's mission, as a stick to say, what, by God, we better be doing this, whatever it might mean for Curl. And you all are coming along for this because you should know better, because I'm taking you at face value what you say I'm taking seriously what you say in the mission statement. So blah, 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 blah. There's lots of things kind of floating around there. And so the final thing I'm going to do is, we took great comfort in 2000 when Father Kolbenbach was named earlier, when he sort of gave his speech. The founding director, Phil Nyden, was in the room for that, what he kind of his vision of what a Catholic university or a Jesuit Catholic university might be. And so we have come back, speaking of carrot and stick, to this time and time again. I'm just going to drop it in the chat. I won't even bother reading it, because that's where we're really wanting to bring in the community, particularly, and not just have a presence among the poor, but have the poor be or community be a part of the conversation, and in this case, the research that we do at Curl. Again, it's tension filled. We don't get it right. We Curl don't get it right all the time. We Loyola don't get it right all the time. But this mission does animate why we do what we do in this place and in this time.
I love that, David. And I'm writing down community partners as true partners, right? That really stood out for me. As a value, as a desire, as a goal. Yeah, I really love that. And you can see, I mean, it's not hard to tell why that's hard to do, right? I mean, there's many barriers to that ideal. And so, thank you for working at it all these years and for holding yourself, to that standard, because there's a lot of sirens that lull us into a different way of being in relationship. And we have to resist those. And yeah, thank you for doing that and calling the rest of us to do that. Bridget.
Thanks. This is not a very well-formed thought, but I want to just put it out there that I think I am always struck by, who shows up to things, who wants to engage in these conversations, and how sometimes the voices and the perspectives that are not present are the ones that we most want to dialogue with, and how challenging that can be to sort of try and hatch, well, how do we make those connections when the other folks are really not literally in the room? But I really think that, again, half-baked idea here, but there's such an opportunity right now in academia that is being sort of pushed and pulled in so many different directions, and the sort of, hegemony of business as usual in universities is very clearly, I think, being identified by so many different people as not working. So the old way of doing research doesn't really work. The old way of teaching doesn't really work. And I think that under sort of the umbrella of Catholic and Jesuit approaches to things, we have some opportunities to align what the critical approaches are all about. That, you know, indigenous ways of knowing and research really can be in discourse with Catholic ways of knowing, and anti-racist teaching in the classroom really is a humanizing practice that aligns with our Catholic identity. So I think that we have an opportunity in the context of sort of now and today, in, again, that idea of kind of translating and regarding for all the different perspectives, to find ways to keep pulling it all together under the same umbrella, and that we are talking about the same things. We might be using different languages, or different vocabulary, we might be coming at it from different perspectives, but the sort of what President Reed introduced, this was not a Latin phrase I was familiar with, a gere contra, and the idea of like moving against the sort of, you know, soporific way of just doing what was always done just because it was always done. If it's not right, then you go against it, actually. And we want to humanize and accompany people through, you know. So anyhow, I feel like sort of excited and inspired that there's an opportunity, and how important it is to get other people at the table who disagree, and sort of invite that disagreement more intentionally, to be able to seek common ground and ways of seeing the connections between our approaches and belief systems, if necessary. I think there's a great opportunity for that. So
no, you're absolutely right, Bridget, that this is a time of disruption, intense disruption. In higher education, but in other ways. And you're reminding me of where Annette kind of started us with bringing to the fore the tensions and the different ways that people would look even at Chicago, at what it means to be in Chicago, and our people with various viewpoints and analysis allowed around that table. Absolutely. Thank you for calling us to that. I think Trevor might have the last word here, or unless if anyone who has not spoken yet, if Jennifer or Colleen or Kenneth, if you want to jump in and haven't had a chance to, Mitch. Okay, Trevor, do you want to?
I was just giving a thumbs up to some of what Bridget was saying, just kind of echoing, just especially the idea that these things don't have to be in competition with each other. I mean, the breadth of sources that Francis uses in Fratelli Tutti, I think hit a lot of what you're talking about. But just one thing on that tension piece, I think about it's more about the secondary education context, but Tim Hanchen's piece in America Magazine, Messianic or Bourgeois, where he basically cautions all Jesuit schools from engaging in there's a really beautiful language that we have, you know, magis, ad majorem Dei gloriam, cura personalis, all of these beautiful things that can just turn into slick marketing devices that can just turn what should be a prophetic context into this privilege perpetuating machine if we are not connected with the prophetic roots that our language actually holds. So if we're not doing the things that David is talking about, if we're not doing the things that Annette's talking about, then not only are we not doing our mission, we're actually actively working against it. And that's the caution that Hanschen kind of offers us in that piece. So I'll post that article in the chat.
Thank you, Trevor. Jennifer?
Yeah, I feel like my perspective is a little bit of outsider-ish in the sense that I only have contact, with maybe 30 students a year. It's very small sample set. But I'm an environmental lawyer out in the city. And so when when I sense from the students, a strong social interest or societal interest in something that's going on in the news, I try to engage with that. And I think they come with a very strong sense of wanting to do good in the world and wanting to interact with the world. And we try to find ways to do that, depending on what the news of the day is, at the time that I'm with them. And I feel like, from that perspective, which admittedly is very limited, I feel like I'm making up, sort of what I think the university wants from me, because I've never received any direction on that. But I was in a Jesuit high school and a Jesuit college, and so I'm kind of drawing on that also to kind of figure out ways to sort of mush those two things together, what I'm sensing that students want and what I'm, sort of bringing to it. And so what I was hoping to hear from Claire is sort of, what does the university want me to do and how does it want me to sort of integrate all these ideas from today?
Thanks, Jennifer. First of all, I'll just say you're saying that that no one sort of put a vision out there for you as faculty, tells me that I have a lot of work to do. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. That's sort of, I feel like I'm taking that out of this as my charge. And I hope you've got a few tools, some language, some this is what we want, right? I mean, what we want is for our students to engage with these values, with this vision, with these themes, to explore the topic that you're teaching, and explore these perspectives, right? So what does it mean as an environmental lawyer to care for the earth? What does it mean to make an option for the poor? We know that the people, the human beings most at risk with the destruction of the planet are people who are in the margins of society. So those kind of questions are, what we're hoping you're doing, as well as to teach them how to be good lawyers, confident lawyers, right? So thank you for that. I've got my work cut out for me, it looks like.
I think the good news, Claire, is that, yes, that is true. You have your work cut out for you, I think. And I think the good news is that it's still a we, and I think folks here are within the university and without the university are key, as Trevor is saying, and you have partners. It's fellow travelers, if you will, to help you out on that. I'm going to give you if not the last, the penultimate word. Anything you want to wrap up with?
Companions. That's great, Bridget. Thank you. Yes. Good companions. It reminds me of a saying from my old tradition, the Dominicans. We had one of our sisters who was the prioress of the congregation that I used to work for, that talked about this search being one that you need good companions to persevere in. So I'm happy to call all of you companions. I thank you, David and Asia, for the invitation to be here today. And thank you all for showing up and engaging. And I hope I've given you something to kind of mull over and think about, and something that drew us together as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. It was a good conversation, a very helpful and thought-provoking presentation. And I feel like if I only had time, I've got like 4 articles to write or something to do. But the other work needs to be done too. So we'll keep pressing forward on that. And I want to actually end with where one of the things you first brought up, which is we are a university. This is Curls at a university. We are, many of us here, affiliated with said university. And yeah, onward. I very much appreciate your leadership and your presentation today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
All right. Bye now.